Amusement park employees, what is your horror story? Story 1. I have two. There was a resident idiot that helped with maintenance before the park opened for the day. One of his jobs was piling the roller coaster track. This involved riding the coaster with this oil can thing and squirting oil on the track as it went around. For one part, you need to be in the front car. For another, you had to be in the back seat. So the normal process was to ride it once in the front car, then switch to the back car and ride it again. Instead, this dumbbutt decided to jump from the front car to the back car while he was at the top level of the ride. He missed, fell 3 stories, and landed flat on his back. Unfortunately, he landed on 3 concrete stakes that were used as part of the tie-down structure. They pierced him in 3 different locations as it had to be cut off. He pulled off of them before they could take him to the hospital. Miraculously, none of them went through any of his internal organs and none hit a major vein or artery. He ended up fully recovering. The amusement park was the place which did the fireworks show every year for the 4th of July. It was in a big public park with a lake, and the fireworks were set off by some of the employees from an island in the middle of the lake. During the show, one of the guys accidentally kicked over a rack of launch tubes right as one of the mortars was firing. It lobbed right into the crowd and exploded in the middle of the crowd. There were several injuries, and one little girl lost her hearing permanently. I was in the crowd on the other side of the lake and saw it hit. Really messed with the guy's head who kicked the rack over. He was the owner's grandson. Between that and several other things that happened that year, including the owner trying to cut the locks off the gates to the park to open them, he forgot that he agreed to close the park for the weekend so that a scene from Born on the 4th of July could be shot in an amphitheater right across from the park. The park crapped down for good at the end of that season. It was pretty sad. I would freaking hate to be the guy who made that little girl deaf permanently. I hope both her and that guy aren't too bad off. So, first a story about why you don't mess around with safety regulations, especially not on a friggin' roller coaster. Good lord. And I feel awful for that girl, all because it sounds like the fireworks weren't exactly handled in the safest way. I'm not a fan of fireworks much to begin with, and this is a reason why. Story 2. I was a caricature artist for Six Flags, and one day a dad and his son came up and wanted a drawing of the 2 of them. Now, the way caricature pricing worked was we would charge per person in the drawing. The father and son wanted a simple black and white headshot of the 2 of them, and a black and white headshot was $10, so for the 2 of them, it would be $20 before tax. I very clearly explained this to them, asking several times, "Are you okay with the ending price?" and they excitedly accepted. Fast forward to me ringing them up at the register, and I tell them the total, 24 something. The father's happy and friendly demeanor quickly dissipates, and he begins arguing with me about the pricing. I calmly explain the situation with pricing and apologize if I wasn't clear enough, and gently remind him that he understood and agreed to 11. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done the drawing. Big mistake. He gets angrier and starts yelling at me, cursing me out for lying and overcharging them to put a few more coins in my pocket. He accuses me of preying on parents and their children, thinking I can take advantage of them because they're stupid suckers. He tries to take the drawing without paying, and when I hold it back and tell him he can't, he throws a $10 bill at me and snarls that's all he's going to pay. That I'm worthless and my drawing isn't even good and doesn't deserve any more than that. I'm really upset at this point and hand him the drawing, wishing him a good day. "Frick you," he yells in response. The whole time, his son is standing there looking embarrassed and terrified. The dad proceeds to pace back and forth in front of my stand, alternating between coming back to the counter and yelling at me and chasing customers away, screaming at them about how I'm stealing money and how the stand is a huge frickin' ripoff. Thankfully, his charade lasted all of 20 minutes, and police finally got him out of there. Left me pretty shaken, though. I had to take my break early and cried over my lunch. First off, even if somehow those prices weren't posted anywhere and the OP made a mistake and mistold the price, that is absolutely no way for the father to react. Set an example for your kid, you absolute jerk. But I highly doubt that was the case, because I worked for a place that had a store return policy in a 20-foot tall paragraph behind the registers, on the receipts, and recited by every cashier from memory with every transaction, and we still had customers throwing screaming fits that they were never informed of it. So I'm inclined to believe the customer was, in fact, not right. Story 3. Worked security at Six Flags. The thing that sticks out the most to me was around 13 years ago on the 4th of July, I went with a group of other security officers to help out at Hurricane Harbor since they had more guests than usual show up. Come to find out the increased attendance was because a radio station that was banned from Six Flags announced that rapper Mike Jones and his crew were going to be at Hurricane Harbor that day, and the station was awarding tickets they didn't have to listeners. So, what ended up happening is that a bunch of different street gangs decided to show up so they could hang out with Mike Jones. So, the place to hang out is the wave pool. Every 45 minutes, there is a 15-minute safety break where everyone has to leave the wave pool. When this happens, most people just get in the lazy river that flows around the wave pool. Well, during one of these safety breaks, all of a sudden, I start hearing people simultaneously yelling, "Hey!" and then see all kinds of people running. Next thing I know, there's a gang fight in the lazy river. Well, one of the first things we are taught is to never get in the middle of a group fight because they will stop fighting each other and start fighting you. Well, a Hurricane Harbor security officer decides to ignore all that and jumps in and gets his butt kicked. I think he actually got yelled at more for getting his radio wet than for getting beaten up. There were a few more fights after that, so then the park called the police to send more officers to help. We ended up having the local SWAT team out there helping out. Every safety break after that had us on high alert for people fighting. People were floating in the lazy river during the safety breaks and just looking at us and bragging about all the trouble that was going on and the fact that the SWAT team was there because they were so crunch. I remember going home that night just being mad at people in general and wondering how they can get off on acting a fool. Every year after that, there was always a group of Six Flags security officers that were sent to Hurricane Harbor specifically to help out with the wave pool and lazy river on July 4th, no matter how many people were in attendance that day. I've not been to any amusement park since I quit because of stuff like that and do not plan on going anytime soon. That sounds absolutely miserable to deal with, and frankly also wildly against the whole mood of the lazy river. A sin against the lazy river is a sin against all humankind. Story 4. In 1988, I was working at park facilities at the now sadly defunct Cayuga Lake Amusement Park near Cleveland. Park facilities is a nice euphemism for janitor. We emptied the trash cans, swept the midway, and cleaned the restrooms. The latter was my least favorite duty. I'm a minor clean freak, so cleaning dirty toilets makes me uncomfortable in the best situations, and this was far from the best. At least once a day, some kid who was barely potty trained would clog the toilet by using what seemed like a full roll of toilet paper. You had to plunge the bowl, then go in with your hands and pull the soggy soiled tissue out in clumps. And of course, there were the various accidents where number 1 or number 2 didn't make it where it was supposed to go. It was already pretty disgusting normally, is what I'm saying. So, one day I'm on toilet duty when someone gives me a heads up that some kid had an accident. Oh, great. Well, better suck it up and get it over with. Inside was a fecal horror show. There was poop everywhere. No, literally everywhere. There was poop on the floor. There was poop smeared on the walls. There was poop on the toilet paper holder. There was poop on the back of the toilet. And of course, the toilet was clogged solid with toilet paper and yes, more poop. Whatever had happened there had been a literal crap show. Young me was more than a little shaken by the sight and the smell, but I shoveled my stress to the back of my mind and spent the worst 30 minutes of my life up to that point getting that stall clean. Finally, I found the employee who had alerted me to the problem and told him it was all clear. "Did you clean the other one?" he asked. I laughed at the weak joke, like something like that could possibly happen twice at the same time. He wasn't smiling. Okay, fine, I thought. I'll go look. I mean, clearly he's joking, right? The kid is obviously freaked out by having to clean so much crap. Let's tell him there's more. It wasn't a joke. A stall or two down, the identical twin of what I just cleaned was sitting there mocking me. For the only time in my life, I had a nervous breakdown. I hid in the nearest closet and just cried for 5 minutes. Once I'd finally pulled myself together, I went back in and cleaned the second stall. And yes, I was paranoid that there might be a third. To this day, I don't know how that was possible. A pair of identical twins with IBS and synchronized colons? Did some kid have so much poop in him that he did both stalls? The only thing that would have kept me from quitting that job right then and there would be the guilt I would feel handing that job off to someone else. Unless I really hated one of the other janitors. Then I would have been laughing as I quit. Have a good rest of your shift, Daryl. I'm out of here. Story 5. I worked at Block Party, which was an adult amusement park created by Blockbuster and only had 2 locations. Think Dave & Buster's, but with an adult-sized McDonald's-style playground, motion simulator, and stuff. Unlike most other ITT, this is not a story of death or dismemberment. It is the stuff nightmares are made of, though. The scene is the power grid, the aforementioned playground in the dark with a techno soundtrack pumping in the background. You get to climb up inclines, explore different themed rooms like a color-changing room and a mirror room to crawl through. There are slides to take you out of the thing or into the ball pit. Oh, heck yeah, there's a ball pit. Really cool things, except when the unthinkable happens. There are a couple of cast members working there, usually one at the front and one roaming. If I recall correctly, I was floating, basically covering breaks, and yes, I was covering the power grid at the time of the event. I was covering the entrance and was going to roam after the coworker I was covering got back. So there I am helping guests get their card in the turnstile right, because following the arrows is hard, and telling them the rules. After that, it is watching them take off their shoes and lock them up. Now that the scene is set, on to the event. I got a complaint about a really bad smell in there and had the roamed try to find it. There was only one way to do that. Crawl through it yourself. She did find it in the mirror room and reported it to the manager. The manager went to find out what was up. The manager could not tell what the source was since it was so dark. I went to the control panel and turned on the overhead halogen so she could have a better look. I'm told she became real religious as the light hit the mirrors up there and screamed out, "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph!" I cannot confirm this, as her prayer could not be heard over the thumping of the bass line being blasted through the speakers. It turns out someone had smeared crap on the mirrors and floor of the room, literal human crap, and people had been crawling in it, getting it on their clothes and spreading it through the apparatus. We had to close the attraction down for the crap to be cleaned up. People are gross. No, that sounds like such a cool concept, too. Oh man, this is gonna be another poo crime episode on this channel, isn't it? Poopitrators, you aren't funny, you aren't wacky. You are monsters, and if hell is real, no prayers will save you from it. Story 6. This doesn't necessarily have to do with working in an amusement park, but it did happen in one. I worked in food and sometimes had to cover stations that weren't my home station. The one time I got put into a Dippin' Dots truck. Everything was fine for a while, but nobody was checking in on me. I had to pee so bad, but I was really busy and couldn't close down to go to the bathroom. Well, it got so bad that I ended up peeing myself. Of course, 30 seconds later, someone from security came in and asked how I was doing. Pretty much said that I peed and bolted. Told my manager I was sick and clocked out and left. I was mortified. It gets worse. Like 3 years later, I was on my senior trip for high school and a bunch of us were sitting around talking about jobs we'd had. This one guy that was pretty mean started talking about how he had to clean up pee in a Dippin' Dots truck because some butt had peed himself. He said it was in the summer after 9th grade and he was pretty sure it was by the little kids section, which was where I was. I had never felt like I had such a weighted secret in my life before. Now I think it's funny, but I still have never told anyone that happened. LOL, weird, this is almost exactly what happened to me. Year before 9th grade, but a Dippin' Dots truck right near the kiddie area at the sweetest place on earth. I was so busy that I didn't have time to run to the bathroom. My manager came and I told him what happened and he cleaned it up while I ran to change. I've told only one person about it, but it is embarrassingly glad to know I'm not alone to enter. Story 7. Not me, but a guy friend who worked a summer at the amusement park portion of the water park. It was a water/amusement park combo. He was assigned to a log flume ride where at the top of the ride it takes your picture and when you're done you can purchase it. He was supposed to man the picture purchase stand. At one point this family went on, the guy at the top took their picture and then the wife came up to my friend screaming that it was a horrible picture and that she demanded he retake it. He had to explain that he didn't take pictures, he just ran the stand where people could purchase them. All the while, her husband, 2 daughters, and son just watched in dumbstruck awe as she claimed he was trying to get her to buy the picture. Eventually, another employee at the park noticed and defended my friend and ushered the wife away, warning her that if she did that again, she would be escorted out of the park. Her husband apologized for the incident, and my friend simply smiled and told him it wasn't a problem. He also ended up giving the picture to the husband for free when he asked for it. I managed to ask him if he was working there again this summer, and he said, "No, I don't think I could handle it. I'll work at the grocery store or something." I like how he's just like, LMAO, dude, take this crap and rub it in her face. It sounds like the husband had had enough of his wife at that point and went up and was like, I'll pay whatever you want for this picture. Money is no option, please. I need this. Story 8. During one summer in high school, I got a job at an amusement park/water park. I was trained on the kiddie rides and worked them for about 2 weeks before they moved me to the adult rides. The problem was, they didn't train me on any of the rides, but most of the time all you need to know is which button starts the ride. One day I'm working these swings, the one that go around and up pretty high. I start the ride when a sudden thunderstorm hits, lightning all around, and I've got like 20 or 30 people locked into a lightning rod screaming. I had no idea how to stop the ride. As luck would have it, my supervisor from the kiddie rides happened to be on the ride at the time. As she would come around, she'd try to yell directions at me. Mind you, the ride is only like 3 or 4 minutes, but that feels like an eternity when you're in a scary situation. So finally, I figure out which button she's telling me to push, I push it, and the ride stops. Yay! But it's now stopped at its highest point, and it's not coming down. I just start pushing buttons like crazy until finally it starts to move down. As people got off the ride, they were crying, hugging, and giving me horrible looks. As soon as they were all off, I got down from the big metal podium I was on just as my actual supervisor arrives and tells me I'm not allowed to get down from my post until someone else comes around and tells me I can. My supervisor was peed at me for daring to get out of the thunderstorm without permission. I don't remember what I said next. I just remember walking out through security telling them I quit. I was shaking, so upset. I was responsible for those people on the ride, and they could have been seriously hurt. You did well, and you did what was safe. Your supervisor is a dong for saying your safety and that of others isn't worth safeguarding without getting permission. I feel like amusement parks are the places that should have just the tightest safety regulations and demands on training, but I've read a lot of these stories. It sounds like most of these amusement parks are run with all the safety concerns of a drunken fraternity during Pledge Week. Story 9. I used to be an operations lead on the Jurassic Park ride at Universal Studios Hollywood. One day, I'm working on the dispatch board, JP3, sitting in the operations booth when a phone rings. The lead manning the cameras answers, then suddenly slams the emergency stop button, shutting the entire ride down. We stopped for a moment so we could offload a disabled guest, and some brain surgeon was annoyed at the delay. So he lifted his kid out of the boat and sent him to call the booth from the emergency phone right next to the Jeep drop effect, which back then was still functional. If we hadn't been shut down, the kid very well could have been killed. We evacuated the ride and stayed down for 5 hours because we couldn't get the water pumps back up and running. Dad and family were escorted from the park, sans refund, though they pitched a fit. Another time we had a couple of kids running around assaulting the costumed characters and then taking off. We had rough descriptions, and I just happened to be at the front entrance while a character was walking around. I saw one of them making a running approach on the mascot and threw a nasty block into him as he tried to pass me. He went down hard and stayed down when another escort dropped on top of him. He and his buddy were arrested, and I got a nice bonus for stopping them. Imagine being in such a rush that you ended up delaying yourself for another 5 hours. Story 10. I have a different take on the question. I might have mentioned the story before, but oh well. I worked at the Forbidden Journey ride in its second year. We had worked out a lot of the kinks of getting the lines to work at their best, and we were getting close to having a perfect hour. This meant the ride not stopping and getting a body into every seat. The park had to be busy, the line sorters had to be on their game with single riders, height checks, and larger guests. It was a lot of parts that had to work perfectly to even be a possibility. Well, we were 50 minutes into the hour and got told that we were very, very close to achieving it. It's one of those things that everyone gets really excited for when you're in the moment. 2 minutes pass, 4 minutes, still good. At 57 minutes, I remember it vividly, our boss's boss comes to me, I'm at the start of the ride platform, and tells me to be ready to send a VIP. He knew what was happening with our perfect hour, so I knew it was a billing deal for him to be risking it to get a VIP through the line, especially when we had a secondary platform to send them from. At 59 minutes, he gives me the signal to hold the line and tells me that Paris Jackson and her brother are getting on. The problem is, they said they were ready, and they weren't. It took them over half of that last minute to get from the special door to the ride, while we held guests back out of their view, and we had 68 empty seats while they tried to get their crap together. Not only did we not achieve our perfect hour, but that was our worst count of the day. Hey, I also worked at Journey in its second year before transferring to Dragons and finally Hippo. I have no real interest in amusement parks, so I get so confused when people just name off rides like, well, everybody knows Forbidden Journey, right? We all know where that is at. Oh, and Hippo is great. Don't forget Potato. And who doesn't like Possum Catastrophe, am I right? Story 11. I operated a few different roller coasters during my fun-filled summer at this amusement park, but most of my horror stories come from one ride in particular. The train was one of those ones that you had to step into with a lap bar restraint. On one particular day, it was over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and the ride had been running as usual for most of the morning. As we were loading the train, a guest came up to me to say that there was an awful smell coming from the front car, and my stomach immediately dropped. Usually with these types of complaints, we'd find that the previous ride had one too many slushes before riding and had lost their lunch. Gross, but we were used to cleaning that kind of stuff. I started approaching the front car and immediately called for my coworker to direct everyone out of the train and back into the line, and to call our supervisor to close the ride. Instead of a normal puke situation, I found a greenish-brown liquid spread all throughout the front car, from the seat down to the floor. Whoever was the last person to ride the ride had crapped all over themselves and hadn't bothered to tell anyone about it. Cleaning human feces is one thing. It's absolutely disgusting, but it can be done. But trying to clean up human diarrhea in 100+ degree weather off of the floor of a car where you had to kneel down and stick your head into the car to reach the very front is a situation that I never would have imagined even in my worst nightmares. The ride was down for the rest of the day, and it took over an hour to clean everything out of the car before we could start really sanitizing it. I would have just burned it. Story 12. I used to work at the Jurassic Park River Adventure ride at Universal Orlando. I have seen a few and heard of a few stories. One I have seen was someone got out of the boat right after the Ultrasaur part and just walked off the boat and stood there at the platform with a look of, now what? Our guys on the camera didn't notice him because he got off at a part where the camera can't see you too well. Turns out the guy was having a panic attack and decided that's what he needed to do. Guy watching the cameras was either fired or transferred, which was too bad because he was really cool. One story I have heard of was during Grad Bash, where people from university take over the park for a night. We had a girl fall out of the boat by the Ultrasaur Lagoon and nobody said anything, and we didn't see it on our end. Ride was crap down looking for this girl, and no one found out where she was until at the end of the night when she turned up for the bus to ride home. Turns out she was found walking around backstage, soaking wet, and was escorted back into the park. No one had told us until after the event was over. Some minor ones are the amount of people who don't take their hats off on the ride, and I, being where the T-Rex attacks you, have to stop the boat from going down the hill until hats come off. Also, if you go on YouTube, you can see a video where someone jumped into the part of the ride to go retrieve their hat right where the boats land. Safe to say they were banned from returning to the park ever again. That Comcast gem gives me a new level of respect for that ride. I will never understand people who willingly get off of rides at an amusement park. Like, even if I was panicking, I would be panicking more being out of what is supposedly the safest place to be. This ride scares me. Better get off in the middle of it, stranding myself in a minefield of machinery and uncertainty. Story 13. I worked as an attraction CM for a Disney park, and my main ride had a height requirement. It wasn't a bad one either. If you were about 4 to 6 years old, you met the height. It wasn't a roller coaster, so there was no fear of the kid flying out of their seat, but because of the nature of the ride, they physically had to sit upright in their seats without assistance and no lap sitting. The number of times I've seen people try to sneak their infants on the ride is astounding. It got to the point where I stopped trying to be nice and would straight up tell people that their babies would be seriously injured. I would have parents jokingly smack their infant's head into the height bar and tell me, haha, they're tall enough now. Like, the ride wasn't dangerous enough to cause shaken baby death or anything like that, but it also wasn't a frickin' Fantasyland ride. I'm going to guess Goofy Barnstormer. Why would parents want to risk the safety of their infant? I am sorry, but why are you like, hell, I'll risk my infant's life in order to get them on a ride that I am not personally interested in and that they will guaranteed never ever remember. I'm a good parent. Story 14. I worked at a water park when I was in high school. Not the sort of amusement park most people think of, but still an amusement park. The park had lots of large pools with a shallow section and a deep section separated by rope. For some reason, parents thought that their kids splashing around in the shallow end qualified them to swim in the deep end. When you're a lifeguard, you're supposed to scan the pool every 30 seconds to check on everyone. 30 seconds is a long frickin' time. On more than one occasion, a kid would wander over into the deep end. They would be okay for a few seconds, but would panic and start drowning. Unlike what you see in the movies, someone drowning is a fast, silent affair. Splashing is the exception, not the rule. Usually it didn't take too long to spot someone drowning. The problem was that when a guard blew the whistle and jumped in the water, people would start flailing like chickens with their heads cut off. Unless the pool was nearly empty, this significantly slowed things down. And then there's the people that try to help. Unless you're a qualified guard, stay out of the way. On more than one occasion, kids got pulled from the water pretty dang near death. Giving a kid CPR is not a pretty sight. One kid did die during the time I worked there. Thankfully, it was on a day off. It doesn't help that some kids are totally fine to be swimming in pretty much any depth swimming pool, while others are totally helpless. I don't remember not being able to swim, but my lady only learned when she was like 11 or 12. Story 15. Not really a horror story, but it was scary to me. I worked at a children's amusement park and they had me operating the Ferris wheel, which is a rough ride to operate. You have to balance it and put people of similar weights on opposite cars, so it's a lot of stopping and loading before letting it go around a few times. As you can imagine, it's difficult for a teenager to explain to an overweight couple why they can't get on the ride when the only other person on the ride is a skinny kid. I was supposed to only be on the ride for 2 hours. They left me there for 4 hours in direct sunlight with no breaks. After 4 hours on a busy day with no water and no break and getting sick of having fat people yell at me for not being able to get on immediately, I lost track of whether it was balanced. I wound up making it go backwards and people freaked the frick out. That's happened before, but I was usually able to stop it before it went all the way around. Not this time. I physically didn't have the strength. Luckily, the owner was around and stopped it. People were peed. When my supervisor came to see what happened, I said, "That's what happens when you leave someone on this ride for 4 hours." No idea how I didn't get fired. No one was hurt, but they sure as frick were terrified. Amusement parks not giving people their breaks seems like it should be a huge violation, especially if people are operating machinery that can be pretty wildly dangerous if too much goes wrong. But hey, maybe the risk of death makes it more exciting. Story 16. I used to drive the monorails at Disney World. We could take up to 4 people with us in the front of the monorail. All they had to do was ask for the nose. One time I was at Epcot Center and this family of 3 got on board. They all seemed to be in a good mood, and as we're traveling, the son said, "Daddy, I don't feel so good." And the father said to him, "What did you eat? Too much junk food?" Just then, I noticed the kid began to hurl. The father just shoved a t-shirt in the kid's mouth, and it was spraying out the sides like a busted water pipe. All over the floor was brown water and chunks of hot dogs. The smell was killing all 3 of us. When we pulled into the station at the transportation and ticket center, there were a few good-looking girls waiting to get in the nose. But me being the lucky guy I am, when the doors opened and they could smell it, everybody on the platform just ran away from the train. The family was so apologetic, but it took a while to get that smell out of the train. Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day. Story 17. Finally, one I can answer. I was working in an amusement park as a 19-year-old and was on the turnstile talking with guests and checking everyone off. About 3 in the afternoon, a very young girl, about 6 or so, came up with her father, both in swimwear. Not unusual since there's a water park attached to the regular park. However, there is a rule in the park that you have to be wearing a shirt to ride the ride, and the girl was in a 2-piece suit. I informed the both of them that the girl needed a shirt and we would be happy to save their spot in line if she had a shirt she could run and grab. Her father raised his voice and loudly asked why I was looking at his little girl and shouted about me being a pedophile. I backed off and told him he misunderstood, but he kept shouting to the line behind him about how I was a sicko, and only stopped when park security arrived a few minutes later. One of the 2 times I felt like I was actually in danger. The dude was furious. People like this are awful. He fricked up, knew it, and was literally willing to start a fight to hide it. Overly protective father that maybe needs to calm down, or complete and total butthole of a human. Honestly, it's hard to say just from a story, but better to keep calmer either way. Story 18. Not the amusement park employee, but I was one of the kids that smashed her head open at a water park as a kid. When I was small, 8, I think, back in the early-ish 80s, we used to spend a good portion of our summer down at Ocean City, Maryland, which has some good water slides. One of these was attached to the Jolly Roger amusement park. Back then, no one really believed in anything like guardrails or rules or non-skid stuff on the pool stairs. So, we're all sliding, then you splash into a fairly small pool, climb out, start over. Only you have to climb up these mossy, algae-covered, slimy steps as people 2 and 3 times your size are hurtling down the slides into the pool. Every time this happens, huge waves of water overtake you. Hard enough as is, right? As I'm attempting to climb out, my pint-sized self gets barreled over by some huge dudes. Ladies, who knows? On a big, gross, slimy foam mat right into the cement pool edge, gashing my head open. Blood everywhere. Do you know how much a head wound bleeds? A lot. Even more so in pool water, apparently. All I remember is the blood and my hair. I have a lot of hair, and it all being matted together and freaking out because, oh heck, no, not more stitches. I had to go get my head sewn up, and we got free park passes for the summer. I rode a lot of stupid rides that summer and have a scar on my head to show for it. The 80s were a fascinating time. Can confirm about head wounds in pools. I was playing chicken with some guys in a water park just outside of Munich, Germany, slammed heads with a guy, and got a small gash in my right eyebrow. I got out of the pool quick, and apparently the water on my body mixed with the blood made the whole front of my body look absolutely covered in blood. And the chaperone there screamed thinking I was dying. Story 19. Typically not a worker, but when I was much younger, I was walking out of Disneyland pretty late one night. They were having a lot of problems with the Rocket Rods ride at the time, and I guess were testing it at night. As we walked under a part of the track, something large flew off and smacked down hard. My dad made sure to find a few cast members and tell them, and the ride was permanently closed not long after. A year or so later, I was bemoaning the fact that it was permanently closed and I never got to get on it when a mother and daughter walked up and said I was lucky I hadn't been on it. The last time they had ridden it had broken down, and while they were waiting, the seatbelts suddenly started tightening. They ended up having to be cut out of the car. Of all the issues I've heard/read about the ride, the seatbelt one has never come up, though others have mentioned things coming off it before. I loved the Rocket Rods as a kid, but they were a mechanical nightmare, and Disney is very lucky that they didn't kill anybody. Story 20. I was the team leader, shift manager pretty much, for one of those raft water rides that sits 12 people on a giant inner tube. A child that was maybe 12 or 13 years old had a seizure while going down the final drop because he wasn't going to be able to get out of the vehicle. We pressed the emergency stop, which drained all of the water, and we removed everyone on the ride. As I was waiting for the EMTs to come and help with the child, I got a call on my radio to report to the top of the lift right away for another emergency. I run full speed through the ride and up the 5 stories worth of stairs to get to the top. The vehicle at the top had gone over the crest, but for some reason did not drop into the water, so the boat was literally teetering off the lift. If it had fallen, it would have been about a 10-foot drop on solid concrete. I'd lead my team in evacuating the entire section of the park while EMTs treated the kid with the seizure, and now the fire department is coming to help get these people off the ride safely while rocking the strongest poker face I've ever had to keep ever. The conversation with the people on the boat on the lift was something like, "Is everything okay? Well, we're just having some technical difficulties. We unfortunately need to remove everyone from the ride. Just please remain seated and we'll get you out in no time. Why can't we get off now? Your boat stopped in a weird spot, so we just need to wait for someone to come tie the boat off. Are we in danger? No, not at all, but for all that is holy, don't bounce around too much and please ignore the news helicopter in the sky. Please ignore the news helicopter in the sky. That is perfectly normal. They're doing a story on people who are in totally safe situations. Now, does anyone have any loved ones they would like to contact? For funsies?" Story 21. Not quite an amusement park, but go-karts. Worked at an indoor go-kart place for years. One big safety rule is not to bump the carts. The track is wide enough for one cart to pass another, but the fact is they're not bumper carts, and people get hurt all the time by bumping each other. Worst example I can remember, a dad and his kid started bumping mid-race. Track guys stopped the carts to give them their first warning, brought them back up to speed. They tried it again and had a bad crash, head-on collision, one cart on top of the other. Not only did it damage both carts, but it dang near sliced the kid's foot off. An ambulance was called and he got 13 stitches. We had to paint the concrete track to cover the blood stain. Always follow the rules, kiddo. Why is it that the parents always seem to be frickin' stupid when it comes to safety of them and their children? Story 22. I work a roller coaster that has since been remodeled in a resort in California. I had a train pull into the station. A guest sitting in the middle of the train was passed out and his friends were freaking out. I told them to leave their friend in the train. We got the ride crap down, and the guest started having a grand mal seizure, bit his tongue, blood spraying everywhere. His buddies told me to do something, get him off the train. They were panicking. I told them to leave him be till the seizure passes. It's better he hits his head on the fiberglass than the concrete, and don't hold him. It can injure the person having the seizure as well as the person trying to restrain him. Every once in a while, when a guest tries, it'd be funny and pretend to pass out as the train pulls into the station. I switch into emergency mode, getting ready to spring into action for another seizure. Story 23. Working monorails at Disney Orlando Contemporary Hotel Station. A kid, 11 or so, gets on the train with his family, has an asthma attack. It goes from bad to horrifying as the parents have no inhaler or magic medical fix. We contact Park EMR immediately, but it seems to take them forever to get up to the platform in the hotel. Kid struggles breathing, gets worse, starts turning an alarming purple shade, sprays crap all over his shorts, and stays conscious and terrified, looking the whole time as the parents and my coworkers look on helplessly. EMR gets there. Within 3 minutes, they sort him out good as new, sans crappy shorts. Asthma is scary. I've had asthmatic bronchitis before where I needed a dilator inhaler, but I never struggled to breathe more than a few seconds. Poor kid. It was awful. How absolutely terrifying for those parents and that kid. The wait of 3 minutes in a situation like that has to feel like an eternity. I'm glad everything turned out okay. Story 24. One of my supervisors got fired for shooting up in the supplies closet and then taking a golf cart and accidentally running over a child. He was rehired after he went to rehab and then tried to sell drugs to the staff every day. LOL. Accidentally running over a child. Story 25. I was at a firm in Williamsburg and we represented the Fan family. Timothy Fan was killed in 1999 after dropping out of the Shockwave ride at King's Dominion. He was really small for a 20-year-old but hit the pavement like a 500-pound man. The photographs of his body were unbelievable. The family lost because King's Domain somehow found witnesses who stated Fan was intentionally loosening his restraints to be able to raise his hands on the coaster. I don't know if anyone is familiar, but the Shockwave is a standing coaster. For someone to want to lift their hands is absurd, and that there were actually witnesses who saw him do it is preposterous. Story 26. Working in a high school night at a Midwestern amusement park. Some dude decides to climb the large structure in the middle of the park. It resembles a tower in France. He is beyond all protected barriers and watches an elevator go up and continues to climb. Since he, at this point, is already a genius, he forgets about the 6,000-pound counterweight that is careening down at him at 40 miles per hour. Dude is cut in half, and one half is pink gel. Yes, all heck breaks loose, body covered in sheets that are billowing in the wind since they are 150 feet above ground. Then, of course, operations continued normally. Well, I knew there would have to be some real horror stories in here eventually, and good lord, this is the kind of stuff that would give people nightmares for life. Don't mess around like that in amusement parks, folks. Story 27. I was working security at a theme park when I was 18. One evening, one of the roller coasters that was stopped in the station got rear-ended by another. There were some injuries, nothing severe, thankfully. I did, however, end up staying up all night after the park had closed, sitting on the coaster to ensure no rookie lose or news media tried to get access to the cars. It was dark, creepy. I was 18 in a closed, deserted amusement park. Oh, it's not like crazy hobos are going to get you in the middle of the night. The raccoons, on the other hand. Story 28. I worked for one summer at a mascara speed park, and it was probably the craziest summer of my life. So many injuries, but nothing ever happening. When working the go-kart tracks, if there was a wreck, you were expected to run across the tracks, dodging cars, and unlodge the stuck cars all before more cars zoomed past. The worst days, though, was on the 4th of July watching a man having a heart attack because I was the first person to get to the car when it stopped and had to wait with him until an ambulance showed up. Story 29. I'm sitting there operating the roller coaster, and this drunk lady in line shakes a turd out of her pants all nonchalantly before getting in the ride. She looked right at me while doing it, and I kind of acted like I didn't see it but was too horrified to look away at the same time. When the ride started, I remember her yelling, "Let's get it!" And I heard that phrase over and over in a nightmare that night. Let's get it. Why do people have to poop where they aren't supposed to poop? What person is doing this? What has happened in your life that you're like, I will poop my pants in line and shake it out? I hate this sight sometimes. Story 30. I worked at an amusement park where one of our goals was to guest relate as much as possible. One day a kid told me hello after looking at my name tag. The name wasn't correct except for the first letter. I was having a pretty rough day and I replied half-heartedly without even really thinking, "Can you read, man?" His mother told me the kid was blind in one eye. I meant to apologize, but instead asked, "Oh, he is?" It was a girl. Story 31. Nothing scary ever really happened at the rides I worked, but the worst this were too large to ride. It was always pretty awkward and some people just not ride the ride if you couldn't buckle the seatbelt. This is what caused my husband and my best friend to lose weight. Both experienced being told that they couldn't ride any of the rides in a park. Story 32. Lifeguarding at this lazy river tube pool basically just tell kids to get two guys like 30 years old are arguing in Polish or something all around on lap 2 or 3 of arguing and really going at it. One of them pulls the other guy's tube. He walked around to the end with his popped tube while he just hopped all the different fences to get outside the park and is not. Story 33. I worked at a popular southeastern theme park. Everything is actually on the up and up and there, except I accidentally broke a coworker's ankle. It was super busy and I was running the gates. She kept being to hurry and close them as soon as guests were clear. Well, guests cleared, but she didn't. Closed them and broke the old lady's brittle ankle. This is why I hate how rushed things can be at theme parks. Sure, people get mad when you aren't fast enough and they have to wait in a line, but the moment you start rushing and suddenly old ladies are getting wrecked. Story 34. Was working the first shift opening the park and doing dry runs with a rollback. There was obvious impact on the front car. One of the groundskeepers to music working through his shift. He died instantly. The following week, don't think to this day they have found all of him. Story 35. Worked at a large amusement park in the Tampa Bay area. 2 stories come to mind. The coaster I worked on had no floors and someone's change from the front row flew out of their pocket and hit a person in the back row near their eye. Coaster came back with a lady bawling and blood all over her face. The second was someone threw up all over our elevator in 100-degree heat with no AC. I drew the short straw on cleaning that up. Story 36. Worked at an old Western movie studio turned theme park. At one time, Gary Busey was filming a movie there, and that's a nightmare in itself. He ended up stealing someone's car and doing donuts in the middle of the desert for an hour. Gary Busey can turn any amusement park into a haunted house real quick. Story 37. Not me, but my sister worked at Walt Disney World, and she told me that one guy stuck his whole hand in the water, even though they tell you to keep your arms inside the vehicle, and he got stuck in one of the mechanisms and pulled his finger out, and they had to go fish for it. Story 38. A few years ago, a smallish theme park in my state made some kind of mistake when chlorinating the wave pools and made a bunch of chlorine gas, and 26 people had to be taken to the hospital. Stalker, holy frick, chlorine is nothing to frick around with. Many moons ago, I was an assistant director of training security at a park known for its cartoon mice. While doing the walk around the park with a group of new hires, I got a call about a possible indecent exposure incident at Fantasyland. Knowing that was the most popular place for children in the park, so much more than Toontown, I rushed the new hires through the backstage area to cut travel time. While we were backstage behind the Small World ride, one of my trainees pointed out someone dropping their pants and leaning against the building. Before we had a chance to close the distance between us and the guy, a blast of brownish yellow liquid exploded outwards in a fan pattern. I stopped the group, got on the radio, and informed them of the bio incident, then slowly made my way to the guy. When I was about 10 feet from him, he looked up, smiled, then blasted the wall again. Without a word, he pulled up his pants and started to walk away. His pants were soaked with liquid crap and pee. Before he was able to leave the area, Anaheim police apprehended him. After questioning him, they called for an ambulance. Upon talking with the police sergeant, found out he was a well-known homeless man in a neighboring city of Orange, usually picked up for swinging his dong at traffic. The kicker, though, was he wasn't the subject of the initial call. When we finally got to Fantasyland, we found out that someone was complaining about a woman breastfeeding. 3.5 years working there, and that is one of the events that still feels fresh in my mind. Why in the F would someone complain about a woman breastfeeding? It's not like you can really see anything but side boob, I guess. If you want to complain about women breastfeeding in public, you're the problem, not the woman breastfeeding. Go ahead, disagree with me if you like being wrong. Story 40. So, Six Flags has a lot of really dumb rules for their employees, which causes there to be a crazy high turnover rate. On top of that, of the fact that on this particular day it happened to be the hottest day of the summer in New England, meant that having only worked there for 2.5 weeks, I was the most senior person in my department of Kidsopolis. This means I have to run the whole operation schedule for my department and tell everybody where to go and what to do all day. Keep in mind, I don't even know half of these people's names. On top of that, nobody knows how to operate the frickin' Zoom jets. So my supervisor grabs me first thing in the morning and tells me he's going to teach me how to operate this ride. Things are going all right when about halfway through this training, my supervisor passes out because it's like 110 degrees. So now I'm supposed to be leading this department full of people I do not know while operating a ride I do not know how to operate, and if I have any questions, then I have no one to ask because my supervisor is unconscious somewhere. Meanwhile, I'm getting calls and someone's like, "Hey, so Sally passed out in the splish splash zone," and I'm just like, who the frick is Sally? Julie is calling me and telling me she's feeling dehydrated and needs to go on break, and I'm like, listen, I got Julio trying to operate the Crazy Cups and the Wacky Wagons at the same time. What makes you think we have enough staff to let you go on break? Fast forward to the end of the day, I've had 3 people faint because of the heat. I still don't know most of my coworkers' names, but I did get yelled at in Spanish over the phone a lot. And because I felt bad that nobody got enough time on break, I told everyone they could go home and I'd sweep up the department on my own. I got pretty good at the Zoom jets, though. Story 41. I worked on the Dueling Dragons at Universal Orlando when in college. For those who don't know, the Dueling Dragons were 2 separate coasters that dueled and had several near misses with each other. They were pretty unique at the time and were super fun. As you can imagine, Universal told people to empty their pockets before they rode so that their phones and crap wouldn't fly out and smack somebody on the coaster at 60 miles per hour. Of course, many times people would ignore this because they're lazy and stupid. I was working one day when the ride shut down completely. Change had flown out of someone's pockets and hit a guy in the eye, leaving him blind in that eye. The tragic part? The guy was already blind in his other eye. Now the guy is 100% blind. They didn't duel anymore after that, and the ride was left permanently much lamer. I still feel bad for the poor blind guy, but the irony is comedic in a dark sort of way. Universal now makes you completely empty your pockets before going on some rides. They provide pre-lockers with fingerprint access and force you to go through metal detectors before getting in line for some rides. Story 42. Worked for an amusement park several summers as a teenager in a haunted house at one off and on. Neither park I worked at was a dry park, so drunk parents ranked among the worst. The haunted house was particularly fun as later groups tended to involve drunks. I took a dive kick to the ribs once while working under an overhang, and we had at least one violent incident a night. For further perspective, most of us were high schoolers and not all that intimidating. For the actual amusement park, the most fricked up thing was when I got sent home early once for a bit of weather coming, which wasn't that odd. Said I should have time to get home, though. I lived a half hour away. What I didn't know was I was going to get sent home in a tornado warning. The warning was posted when they sent me home. They knew the line of storms was about to hit. I ended up pulling over after a tree branch hit my car and got stuck in a hailstorm. The roof of my car was dented. No tornado actually touched down, but we had bad straight-line winds. A few other employees were also told to go home and had pretty similar stories of trying to. The woman working the office that day had just decided on her own we'd be better off going home than staying in the fairly solid permanent buildings on the premises. AKA, once we were gone, not her problem. Story 43. A huge storm was coming. I was operating the railroad at the time. Unfortunately, we left the station right before they were able to call us to close the ride. So as we are on our way, suddenly there was a huge downpour. Upon arriving at the station, we were immediately directed to an employee shelter. Now this is where even more of the interesting stuff happened. 1, people were stranded at the station away from the entrance, wanting to ride back. I had specifically warned that the ride can close at any time before people boarded. 2, we were told that we cannot suggest any shelter because that would make the park responsible. 3. A baby in a stroller was abandoned in the storm near the kid area. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.